All right, guys, welcome in, welcome in. I hope you can hear me okay. I know you can't see me and you're not going to. This is a podcast channel, so I want you guys to relax, just sit back and relax a little bit. And a lot of you guys are just going to circle back and just watch this. And I implore you to turn this on when you have time, when your energy is settled, when you're not hyped up, when you're not provoked or trying to find some answer to a question, when you can just listen. And this is what I made this channel for you to just sit and listen. It's not for you to start talking too much and thinking too much. This is for those of you who are a little bit more erratic and impulsive. I know that's going to be challenging. So I want to just say that, number one, I think only people who are subscribed can make commentary. And let me look at this chat. Yeah. So I just kind of boiled it down because I don't want a lot of talking going on. I want some listening to happen. Um, I'm going to talk about abuse. So if this is something that is fresh for you, if it's still triggering for you in a way that you can't listen and it makes you just want to talk or do the blame game or any of that stuff, I would definitely opt out of this. It's just not worth it. A lot of things I've opted out of recently. I've opted out of pointless conversation with people. I just won't do it. I get up and walk away. I've opted out of trying to be right with, like, I don't care about any of that stuff at this stage of the game in my life. I care about, my peace and protecting myself and things like that. So I would definitely opt out of listening to things that um, traumatize you, or forcing yourself to watch something that traumatizes you is just not worth your peace. So I'm going to talk about domestic violence. I'm going to talk about relationships in terms of all sorts of abuse: mental, spiritual, emotional, physical. And I'm going to talk about the root of that and how it gets started and how it gets passed on to different generations, and without you even realizing this. And a lot of you guys are abusive. You're abusive to your relatives, you're abusive to your parents, you're abusive to yourselves, even more importantly, and you don't even recognize that at all. You don't recognize any of it. So I went to see a film called This Ends With Us, and I highly recommend it. And in the theater, when I went, there were a majority of young individuals, which I was really happy that they actually, I didn't even recognize what I was going into because I don't like to watch trailers or know anything much about films before I go see it. You guys know I was a film journalist for many, many years, and I go in blind so that I can have a very open heart and open mind to the content. So I didn't recognize what I was going into. And there was a lot of young people, young couples, actually, like teenagers, young 20s, going in with their boyfriends to watch this, or girlfriends. And I thought that was really positive for them to be exposed to this type of behavior. So I do recommend you guys to actually go and see this film. Uh, I didn't know whether I was going to do this with my members for session 52 on SSSM, but I guess I'm going to do it here because this is my podcast channel. We can just sit down and listen. So I want to talk about negative patterns in relationships and how they form, um, and why they're challenging to break. This goes with violence in relationships, and I'm going to use a couple examples of my life, and I'm going to throw those in there. And I'm comfortable doing that. I'm not ashamed or anything about these situations. Actually, they're in my books, so I'll just share them with you. So, negative patterns, and these are things that are repetitive within your relationships, start with you observing a particular behavior and becoming accustomed to it. You see something over and over and over again, you become used to it. And in a lot of cases, you become numb to it. You kind of think it's normal. It's like if you live in your little bubble, if you grew up in a very wealthy family, you think that everybody has 17 bedrooms and security and, lives in a loft. And like, you don't know any better. You think everybody has what you have. I grew up thinking everybody lived how I lived and everybody had what I had. And it becomes normalized for you. And also, you begin to associate relationships with whatever goes on in your house. So, when you look at your parents, who are the first individuals that show you what love is, that show you what a relationship is, that is pretty much the hierarchy of every relationship that's going to happen in your life. So if you have parents who are, very quiet and they don't really talk to each other, and they have no form of um they don't show any form of emotion. This is how you think relationships are supposed to be. You're like, okay, well, this is what it is. Everybody's quiet, nobody cries, nobody shows emotion. And you begin to digest that as this is normal. So when you see it elsewhere, like when you get older and start to go outside the home, it's kind of foreign to you. You're like, why are they hugging? Why are they crying? Why are they so touchy with each other? I'm not used to that. It's not something that my parents do. This is not something that's real. And so that's the same with negative relationships and violence. A lot of individuals, when they're little, maybe 3, 4 years old, they always hear fighting, arguing, cussing, disrespectful words. Particularly if we're talking about little boys. And if you've seen this film, you know how to reference this. I'm not going to give you any spoilers or anything like that, but you need to go and watch it and and see exactly what I'm talking about, or watch any film basically with where the parents are, hitting each other, or the fathers doing negative things. But um you have little boys and you see, or little girls, and you see the father choking the mother or punching her in the face and things like this. Even within that trauma, it becomes some sort of normality for you. And you're like, well, this is how I'm supposed to treat women. And ordinarily, when you're in a family where this is the dynamic, where the father hits on the mother and their sisters and brothers, the little boys will start to behave that way towards the little girls. Like, this is something that's natural. They're like, okay, well, this is how I'm supposed to react when I'm triggered. I hit the girl, or they become very aggressive with their siblings, with their sisters. And you'll see this in the relationship. Even if they try and take on a protective role, like they want to protect their mom, there's something that the seed is planted, whereas this becomes something aggressive. Like, they're supposed to have this aggression towards women. There's some sort of dynamic where they feel this is a normality to be aggressive and to take what they want, or to overpower. And so this starts very young. This is not something that could happen if you were in a healthy relationship, and all of a sudden you start seeing this and you're like, oh, I think I'll do that too. Like, no, like, you, at that point, you already have a very strong sense of values, right and wrong, and things like that. So you know better. But this happens at a very young age. And this is how I can tell whether somebody grew up in a very volatile household. Like, I can tell right away. Like, that's just something I can see, across the room. I can tell how people behave, how they speak to you. Particularly in men, I could tell immediately whether they just grew up with their mothers. There's all sorts of things that I can pick up just by their behavior, how they treat women, and how they talk to their sisters or their mother, and so forth. And so On my channel, I always talk about relationships and the psychology of relationships, how people behave. And I know it gets very triggering because I am a Scorpio channel, and the basis for my channel has a lot to do with astrology. So I think a lot of individuals, even some of you listening, you love to hide under the guise of astrology, right? Sometimes you'll make up an excuse and be like, oh my gosh, I was with this Leo and Leos are aggressive and so forth. And you'll make that as an excuse of why you attracted somebody who is volatile. But the fact that they were a Leo or a Scorpio, whatever, is actually not the reason you attracted somebody volatile. Now, yesterday, I had a very deep conversation with my members, and we talked, went way back, started from the beginning of how you attract your relationships. And because I don't like excuses and I don't like the blame game, I'm very triggered by people who cannot have accountability and not really look at themselves in a way. And this is why I said this is going to be triggering to a lot of individuals because this word victim shaming has become very popular within the last couple of years. And although there are people who are real, you know, victims, I just can't stand that word. Um, I take it further and I talk about, why you even attracted these individuals. And I think that is far more important than somebody just recognizing that they are in an abusive relationship. Is like, how did you get here and how did you invite abuse into your life? This is what I want to say. How did you invite abuse into your life? And I know that's a tough pill to swallow because it's like, oh my gosh, wait a minute, did I do this? And if we really want to take it to that level, which I do, I would say, yes, you did invite it into your life. And how did you invite it into your life? How did we invite this abuse? So in this film, um, this young lady, the lead character, who's played by Blake Lively, her father dies, and there is a course of flashbacks, and her father was a very abusive man, so she had a very tough time having a lot of empathy for him when he passed away. She had flashbacks of him strangling her mother. I think there was even a scene of a rape with her mother, and her coming downstairs and watching that. Her father almost killed a boyfriend that she had, and it was very tough. It was just constant abuse growing up and watching this man that you call your father, who's supposed to be your protector and somebody you trust, abuse your mother. And not only that, watching her stay in the situation. I think that's something people don't really talk about. I think they put more focus on the person who's actually doing this type of abuse, whatever that may be. But they really don't talk about the impact that it has watching the child observe the person who is staying in that scenario, like staying there year after year, and you're just like looking at them like, okay, well, you're getting abused every day or every week or whatever, and you're still in this house, like you're still telling that person I love you, like you're still cooking for them, you're still like, what is going on? Like it becomes a state of confusion of like, okay, you're doing this. And if that happens to be, and I'm not saying that men don't get abused because a lot of them do, but in this case, we're talking about the woman being abused by the husband. If you have a little girl who is observing her mother um, stay in the situation, it changes her in a big way. And it changes her in many ways, particularly in how she's going to handle the men in her life, how she's going to handle that. She's watching her mother be abused and not leave or not take action or not even complain. It's sending a signal like, okay, well, I'm a woman, this is how men are supposed to treat me, or this is something that I'm supposed to accept. This is something that is okay because mom's not doing anything about it. Mom is still here. Mom is still gets up the next day and cooks for dad. Mom is still doing this. So we're both women. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. It has a really big impact on how she's going to feel about herself as a woman and how she's going to treat herself within relationships, particularly with the opposite sex. Now, for any of you guys who have observed this in your life or have gone through this in your life, and you see the title, Healthy People Do Not Attract Abusive Relationships. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. And if a psychiatrist or any psychotherapist wants to confront me with this in my comment section or in an email or behind the scenes with me, I would love to sit and address this situation. And so this is how the negative patterns in relationships start. They start with observing, they start with ingesting, they start with watching, and then your little brain says, okay, well, this is how it's supposed to be. Now, if you are a member and you heard my live stream, you joined my live yesterday, I talked about it. You can probably hear the ambulance right now. I live in New York City. I live in one of the loudest, busiest cities in the world. And I gave you a little example of how when I spent time in Hawaii, the first couple of days was really rough for me because I'm used to the noise. I'm used to the people. I'm used to the activity. So that quiet and silence had me triggered because that was something that was not familiar to me, particularly because I grew up in a family that was very loud and it was very nerve-wracking, and I never felt settled. I never felt safe. So any type of distraction with noise and things, that's probably why I'm a city girl. Actually, come to think of it, I never thought about it that way. But this is a revelation. This is probably why I am a city girl, because I need the action, the noise, the the intensity of it. And it kind of reminds me of how I grew up. And so I would probably never fit into the country where it's silent for long periods of time, because I would be looking for what's familiar. And what's familiar is the intensity of my childhood. Okay. So this is how the negative patterns start. And even though you grow up and you say, well, okay, I watched my mom get beat up, or I watched my aunt get beat up, or I watched whomever get beat up in the house, and you know it's wrong, that activity for a long period of time has altered your nervous system completely. And even though you know it's wrong, when you get into relationships, whether you have like your girlfriends, if you're a girl, or some guy, you're going to choose your friendships on a subconscious level. This is not going to be conscious. You're going to choose them based on your traumas. And this is where you kind of bond through traumas. And I talked about this. So this young lady in this film, she met a guy, and I already knew he had a problem. He was very aggressive to begin with. And they both had deep inner traumas. She had come from a family watching her mother be abused, and this guy was an abuser. So it was really a perfect match, because I mean, the energy is you're going to draw in this type of energy. Now, had she been a healthy woman coming from a healthy relationship where her father was the protector and her father was, a guy who did not have an anger problem and he wasn't abusive and he treated her with a lot of respect, her energy would not have attracted somebody who wanted to harm her. It just doesn't work that way. And I know a lot of you guys, I hear a lot of complaints in my comment sections, particularly, talking about astrology, or people want to talk about their past abusive. Oh my gosh, so and so did this to me, did that. And it's always they did this. And there's never a connection between this is who I invited in because my parents were like this, or my father did this to me. There's always kind of this blockage, which I think is um, just something maybe you have to deal with your therapist with. Uh, there's this disconnect between I choose these. In fact, many of you don't even would never say this because the accountability, maybe you just aren't there yet with being accountable for actually choosing your relationships, with saying that I chose somebody abusive because this was what I was accustomed to. Now I wasn't aware of it, but this is what happened to me. And now that I am aware and working with it through, with a therapist, I know better. I can see the signs. I can see when I am trauma bonding with somebody. Okay. And so this film was you just saw the steps because it doesn't happen right away. Nobody comes in your face and just starts punching you the first time that they meet you. It doesn't work that way. There is there's a level, and when the movie started, when they first met, I could see this man was very aggressive. I was like, okay, this is a very aggressive person. But I can also see her ability to kind of be the person who soothes everything. Some of you guys, in your relationships, particularly if you came from very abusive backgrounds, you um you're the mediator. You've had to mediate. You've had to calm everybody down, or what Will Smith says in his book, distract. Like he was the mediator between watching his mother get beat up, and he had to make everything funny. Like, oh my gosh, let me do this so that this wouldn't happen. So a lot of you guys come from scenarios like that. Either you put your head in the sand and pretend it didn't happen, or you jumped in the middle to try and distract. And so when you go out into the world, if somebody aggressive comes at you because you've invited them in with your energy, I'm going to put it that way, and maybe be very blatant with you. You've invited abuse in with your energy, with your traumatic energy. And once they recognize that and they become aggressive with you, you turn into the person who tried to mediate with, like you did in your upbringing. You start repeating that. Okay. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can soothe it. Ooh, I'm really sorry. No, this didn't happen. And then you think that you can calm them down. Right. And so this is how the negativity, the patterns start. And what happens is, as it goes further, it gets more challenging to break that. And this is why you'll see people who've just been squatting in relationships for 15 years. I've been dealing with this for 15 years. It's like, okay, well, you really didn't have to deal with that for 15 years, but you dealt with it for 15 years. Maybe your mother dealt with it for 15 years. Now, um, I want to talk about a situation where I'm going to give you an example of how this is so relevant. And this is relevant in a lot of you guys' situations right now. A lot of you guys are in abusive relationships. Maybe you're not getting physically hit, but people are talking down to you. Maybe they're calling you stupid. Maybe they're saying things to you that are very dismissive, and you're accepting it. You're taking it because you've watched your mother do it for so long. You're thinking like, okay, well, this is what I have to sacrifice, right? And you're tolerating it. You're tolerating it. And then you come in my comment section, oh my gosh, I've been tolerating this for blah 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 blah. And so in my book Dating Scorpio, I talked about a situation with the Pisces, and if you read the book, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I never had any fist fights with him or any other man in my life, but I've seen abuse for a very long time. And I've even had some of it myself, um, not with partners, right? And so there was a part of me when I was young that it went a couple of ways. Either I would be over aggressive to make up for the fact that, like, oh, well, that's not going to happen to me. That's not, whatever I observe is not going to happen to me. Or when it presented itself, there was kind of like a freeze. It was like I froze. So in my book, Dating Scorpio, I talked about a situation where the Pisces got aggressive, and I recognized it right away. And I think I was like 19 years old. And this has never come up in our relationship. I met him when I was like 13. I was 19 at this point. Any like aggression had never come up in our relationship to this magnitude. And it was about to be a physical confrontation. And I was like, and I recognized that. I remember thinking back, like, oh, this is not going to happen with me. Right. And interesting enough, at 19 years old, I recognized that, like, what is this, a repetition? Like, is it my turn now to like tolerate? And I put that in quotations. And I was like, no, this is not what I'm doing. Like, I'm not gonna do this. And you guys know what happened in the book. Thankfully, he's still alive. And I never dealt with him again. And this was way back in the 90s, guys. Now, I look back at myself and I didn't think I was that mature, at 19 years old. But looking back, wow, I was like, oh shit, I was kind of a badass, because I see even grown people who will have a confrontation like I did and still go back with the guy. Not even just go back, go have his babies, move in and everything else, and have this volatile physical relationship for like 20 years. And like me at 19, it popped. As soon as the shit popped off in my head, I was like, no, absolutely not. And he did try and talk to me again, just like in the movie. Oh, I understand if you don't want to talk to me again. Nope. That was the end. There was no relationship after that. There was not like, oh, well, I didn't mean it. I didn't no, there was none of that. There was something about me, and I guess I'm surprised now that I had the maturity that I did to have that, to nip that shit in the bud. And I've never actually had a scenario like that again, and I'll be 49 years old soon. So that was 30 years, guys. So I want to talk about like shame and fear and things like that, um with this scenario, because it isn't as easy as it seems to just get up and be like, oh, I'm gonna leave, and I'm never going to deal with this person again. Now, for me, it was easy because, I wasn't married with this person. I wasn't 6 kids in with this person. I wasn't sharing mortgages and all this other stuff. There's a lot of stuff at stake that people deal with, mentally, emotionally. They sit there long enough and they become desensitized as well. They're like, okay, well, this is just part of the deal. Thankfully, I haven't had that situation, and I don't ever want it. I don't ever want it. So in any type of violent situation, and this is pertaining to men too, I've seen men get smacked by their girlfriends. I've seen men get cussed. Men get cussed out by their women. I've seen in public some ugly, volatile conversations where the woman was in the man's face and this, that, and the other. And I was like, oh my gosh, if that was my son, I like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I could just imagine, like, if that was my son, or if that was like my brother, or if that, you know what I'm saying? Like, think of all the things I would do to this chick. Like, you know, um, so it goes both ways. But it's like, when people aren't in these situations, they're so embarrassed about it. There's an embarrassment that comes with it, because I remember that night when I was after I had this confrontation with the Pisces. I went to my mother's house because I was on my own. Actually, I had my own apartment. I had roommates. I was 19. Thank goodness my roommate was there, because he came out and like handled that shit, because he heard me like going off, and he was like, oh, and I think he stayed in there for a while to see if we could dissolve it. And he just came out. Thank goodness he was home. Um, and after that happened, interestingly, and I've never talked about this. Actually, this is not even in my book. I drove to my mother's house and I told my mother about it. And guess who didn't give a shit? She was like, oh, well, you don't have to stay over there. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. And it was never mentioned again. It was kind of like, She looked at me, and for any of you guys who are around my age, who are older, the older generation, my parents were born during the war. Women back then hid a lot of things. This is why I don't like the conversations when people, particularly in the Black community, want to brag about their grandmothers being married for 40 years and 50 years and this, that, and the other, and all this Black love and things like that. And they don't want to talk about the abuse that goes on, like the heavy abuse that goes on within the family members that are never spoken about. They're never talked about with anybody. It's just shoved under the rug, and it just keeps repeating itself down the line. And all the women kind of be hush hush about it. And so I don't fall for that. I don't go for that. I don't believe in this whole like 40 years together and nothing's happened. That's possible, but unlikely. Unlikely. I'm a woman, so I already know all the little secrets that women do. They keep their little mouths shut. Particularly if there's a lot of money involved in that marriage and things like that. I've seen way too much to even listen to that. Mostly men say that. Oh, this Black love, I went 40 years together, blah, blah, blah. Just like, yeah, whatever. So anyway, my mother was so desensitized from that. And she was like, oh well. She was looking at me like, oh well. And I was 19 years old, guys. 19 years old. I was a kid. And I'm thinking, like, what would I do if my child, honey, I would have been in the car, like, where this motherfucker at? Like all sorts of things. Um, and right then and there, I already knew that it was not to be discussed. It was not to be discussed. And so a lot of people hide a lot of shame when they're in abusive relationships. And in this film, interesting enough, the main character, Blake's character, the first time this guy hit her, he played it off like it was an accident. And she's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I know it's an accident. It's an accident." And you can see the progression of that, of him recognizing that this was something that she was used to, and this is unspoken. When you meet somebody else who's been in an abusive relationship, your souls recognize each other. Okay, your spirits recognize each other. Healthy people don't attract these individuals. They do not. And every single movie you see, in fact, and I don't even think this is a conscious thing with the directors who write these stories and create these stories. I don't think it's conscious at all. Even when you watch films where, maybe it's like a high school film, and you see the outsider, the kid who's like comes from a broken home and this and that, and he's so troubled and blah 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 blah. Whoever he makes friends with are going to be the same of its kind, like in the movie Heathers, or like whatever movie you watch. Whoever those characters are drawn to are going to be cut from the same cloth. Your friends are the same as you because your spirits choose each other. You have similar stories, you can talk about your family's mess, and you can relate to that, and this is how you bond. So when you meet somebody who come from an abusive family, and these are people who are unhealed. I'm not talking about people who've been to therapy, people who recognize that, people have flushed out the trauma, and now they have a healthy relationship with themselves, and they can choose healthy partners and friends. I'm talking about individuals who go through life talking about, I picked the wrong man, I choose the wrong ones. This one was the asshole, that one was the asshole. And they got a whole long list of assholes, not recognizing that they're the common denominator in that whole scenario. And so your souls choose each other's. And when he met her, he could tell that his ugly was something that she could tolerate. He could tell right off the bat. He would not have even approached a healthy person. They wouldn't have recognized each other. And so there's a lot of shame and fear that goes along with the abuse. And individuals are not going to really talk about it. They're going to shove it under the rug. And I bet if you ask your mothers or if you ask your grandmothers, have you and dad or whatever, did he ever put his hands on you and blah, 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 blah. I'm sure they have a lot of stories, but I don't think a lot of people are brave enough to ask their mothers that, or are brave enough to have a conversation with their grandmothers about that, or how they stayed in the marriage for 40 years. And everybody was in love and this, that, and the other. I don't think they really want to hear the trauma, the truth of a lot of these situations. And so when I had that scenario with that Pisces guy, how we even got together was our spirits recognized each other. And the interesting part about him was that he hid his family dynamic very well. Like there was absolutely no no physical signs of his parents being disrespectful towards each other, or him coming from a traumatic household. But his mother was actually the one who was very in charge. She was the loudmouth. His father was very quiet. And if there was any abuse, it was the mom towards his dad. And interesting enough, he chose somebody like me who was a little bit more aggressive because of my upbringing. So look at how the pattern just kept going like that, right? And so I decided to end the pattern. When he started that shit that night, I already knew for a fact, like, oh, no, no, no. This is the first and the last. Like, I'm not the sucker. I'm not calling you back tomorrow. You're not ever coming back to my apartment. You will never, there will be no threats again. You will never, like, I knew that if, all the way to my bone marrow, that was how it's going to happen. But I have to say, driving over to my mother's house to tell her what happened was very embarrassing. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. And I kind of like slid it in. It wasn't like I got there and was like, oh my gosh, look what happened. No, no, no. That wasn't the conversation that it was. And so we never had that conversation ever again. And even if I had it again, she wouldn't give a shit. She would be like, oh well, this is what women do. She would have had that sort of attitude towards it, which a lot of women do have that sort of attitude towards it, kind of like, oh well, this is what's supposed to happen. This is the initiation, or this is whatever, this is what marriage brings, that sort of thing, which is not true. I wanted to talk about recognizing the patterns, because a lot of you guys may be in the healing process and you may be out there looking for a relationship. And, I've said this many times, I would not do that. I would skip trying to go out looking for a relationship when you have a whole closet full of baggage and trauma that you're dealing with, because the first person you're going to meet is somebody who matches that trauma, and you're just going to have more of it, and you don't know what's going to happen. Probably nothing good is going to come out of that. And I see that over and over again. Many of you who have private readings with me, many of you guys who read my books, many of you guys who send me DMs and emails and things like that, I already know what you're coming to me for. I already know that next relationship is going to be a problem. I already know that you have not healed, that you're not even in the midst of getting a therapist, and you're talking about, oh, I just met a guy. And I already in my mind know what kind of guy you met, because I already know what type of person you are. You didn't meet a healthy guy, so you can pretty much count on that being some sort of abusive relationship, something that you're accustomed to, because your spirit, uh your internalized trauma is going to seek out individuals that are familiar to you. And that means your whole childhood is coming right back. Okay. So a lot of signs that I notice back before I started my breakdown and rebuild, when I would meet men, um, I knew automatically that they had a lot of problems, and I knew also that I did not want to be enveloped in their problems, because I had my own shit to deal with. Um, the first thing was aggressiveness. Okay. And there's always somebody aggressive. Think about your friend groups or people you grew up with. There's always somebody aggressive in that group who kind of overpowers the others, who's loud or who's very physical. Um, when I met my mirror guy, he was very aggressive, extremely aggressive. And there's one situation that I'm going to tell you guys about that I didn't even write in my book. So here's something that I haven't told, but you can tell by the level of aggression. And in the beginning, it's not that intense. It's just enough so they can see if you're going to, number one, call them out and be like, oh my gosh, you're so aggressive. Get away from me. Like, I don't want anything to do with you. Or if you're going to try and be the mediator like you was growing up to soothe, like when you watch your mom or your auntie or whoever get abused, they're going to see if you're that mediator, if you're going to try and soften it, or if you're the person who would tolerate it. Like, oh, just calm down, blah, 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 right? And so it kind of starts like that with a little aggression, like in this film. This guy was very aggressive. He was like asking her questions like, well, tell me about yourself. And she would be like, oh, just a little bit. And then she'd be like, what about you? He'd be like, oh, you didn't answer me yet. And I was like, oh shit. Right then I already stopped and was like, something's wrong with this guy. Like I would have got up and left immediately. Like, okay, you know what? Have a good night. Let me get out of here. You know what I'm saying? I would have, wiggled my way out of that, but she stayed. And it was kind of like there was something she was accustomed, like, okay, well, let me just stay. And then he got more aggressive and it kind of went on and on. Like then he got sexually aggressive with her, and she kind of liked that shit. And I was like, okay, you like it because it's something that's familiar. You watch your father behave that way, so you figure like, okay, this is how it is with men, which is not true. This is how it is with men. It is absolutely not true. Okay. And so in the beginning, you'll see a little bit of aggression. Now, here's a story where I'll tell you about, I'm going to give you a couple examples actually. I gave you an example with the Pisces person, how he got aggressive. Um, Actually, we were having a conversation. Let me go back to that because I want to give you this full example of how it began. So I've known him most of my life, actually. Um, I want to say kind of met him at 13, but our families knew each other for a very, very long time. And so I think at 13 is when we started becoming like friends as as semi adults, like adult preteen or whatever. And so we never had an aggressive kind of contact with each other. But that night where he was in my apartment, the aggression started a little light. It was like I was on the phone and he got mad that I was on the phone, and he did something that they did in scary movies, and he pulled the cord out of the wall. And I started laughing at him and I was like, what the fuck is this, like a scary movie? And I clowned him for that. And then he got more aggressive. So I think he was kind of trying me, like, oh, let me yank the thing out of the wall to see if how she's gonna react. And my reaction was laughter. I was like, and I realized in that moment, I was like, oh, this is like what? Like, I don't know, Planet of the Killer Ape. Like, what are you trying to do? You know what I'm saying? Those movies where the guy rips the phone, like, what the fuck are you trying to do? And that set him off. So it always starts out with a little light aggression and then it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And so in the film, uh, the guy right off the bat was very aggressive. His mannerism, his conversation, I was like, this guy has an effing problem. And it was something that she was accustomed to. So she kind of flowed with it. And a lot of you guys, particularly if you have a lot of fire and air, you think that shit is cute. You call it feisty. But I would be very weary of something like that, particularly if you come from a traumatic household where you watch your mom get abused or your auntie or whomever, or if it were you getting abused by a male adult. This is something that they do, like and if like, oh my gosh, like this is a sign, I don't want to go through that, I already know I'm healing and I'm trying to go to therapy for my shit, this already is starting off wrong, let me hurry up and get out of here. Some people don't even recognize that. They call it feisty. Oh, so cute how you got sassy with me. Like, it's not cute when a grown man gets verbally aggressive, or particularly start talking about sex or like grabbing your arm. Like there's nothing cute about that. And I would not take that lightly. So I remember this happened. Somebody got aggressive with me. I was in the subway, and there was a man, and this was before my breakdown and rebuild. So I had a lot of work to do, but I still, like I said, two traumatic souls attract each other. So he was selling his books outside of the subway. And of course, I'm a writer, so I went to look at his books, and he's like, "Yeah, you should buy my books." And he was very aggressive. And because he was aggressive, I was like, "Oh, never mind, no, thank you." And then he stood in front of me, like, to kind of block me going into the subway. And he was like, "Why?" He was like, I don't know. He said something to me, and I should have just kind of like went around him, but my mouth started running, which it shouldn't have. And I was like, "You know what?" I was like, "You seem like a mama's boy." Because I recognize the sign of aggressive men are usually, oh gosh, whew, you guys are going to come at me in the comments for this. Aggressive men are usually raised by single mothers, which I've seen most of them. They usually come from families where they watch the men be aggressive and abusive, and somehow they start mimicking that. And so I knew right away. I was like, "You seem like a mama's boy." And he was like, "What is that supposed to mean?" He was like, "Yeah, my father left me and I was raised by my mother." Like he was letting out all this aggression, and he was so angry. And he was like, "I demand an apology." That pissed me off. I demand. Now I didn't know this guy from a can of paint. He was like, "I demand an apology. You better apologize to me right now." Like it was a whole scene. Oh my gosh. And I refused to apologize. And I was like, "Get out of my way." Like I recognized that. I was like, "Let me get out of here. Let me get away from this person." Um, I'm not gonna buy his book. I don't want to talk to him any longer. I recognize that he's a fucking problem. And I attracted him because I am a problem too. So let me take my problems and let me go on about my way, because I don't want to deal with somebody else's problem and mine. I got enough on my plate. So that was already right off the bat somebody who was very aggressive. Now I've seen other people like go by and talk to him. Maybe they like that shit. Maybe I don't know. But I recognized it immediately. And so um this is something that many of you guys who are in relationships, who send me messages, or who randomly put like 10-page comments. There's a comment that I'm going to address that's under one of my videos right now, where they're talking about a Scorpio was very abusive, this, that, and the other. And not recognizing that they have attracted that into their lives. And I know that it's really challenging to see that in yourselves, or even to admit that in yourself. And I have this conversation with people in my family, and I'm like, "Well, you stayed there. There was a reason why you stayed. There was a reason why you attracted this person. Why would you choose them out of all the healthy men in the world?" And they still can't see it at like 50 years old, 60 years old, 70 years old. They still can't see that they're the common denominator. And many of you guys are not going to see that you're the common denominator either. And this is why I said this is very triggering. So this movie was really amazing in showing the gradual steps. And like I said, a lot of directors don't even realize they're doing this when they um, or maybe they do. Maybe they do recognize this from a deeper level, but I don't think a lot of them do recognize when they pull these stories together. They put the broken people with the broken people. Okay, this girl in the film have always been with broken people. Her first boyfriend was somebody who came from an abusive family. He tried to unalive himself. That they got together through trauma. Okay, and so every relationship she's had has been through trauma. Thankfully, the whole point of the story was that she ended it with her, and she recognized it. She was like, "No, this is not, I'm not going to pass this on to my daughter. This is not going to happen. Like, I recognize what is going on." And I knew that I didn't want to be like my mother, so I don't even know how I slipped into this. And a lot of you guys don't know how you slipped into that either. But I just want to wake you up tonight. If you are in a situation, maybe that person is sitting in the bed with you right now, maybe you're in the apartment with them right now, and you've been there for years, and you got their kids, and you've got a bunch of excuses, and you don't want to see yourself. Maybe there's a lot of shame for having it go on for years. Maybe, you feel like your spirit is broken, you can't move on. This film did a great job in um, w- waking this girl up, like having her recognize. Even the sister of the abuser told her, like, my brother's not the one. Like, trust me, this is a really bad mistake you're making. Um, so when people start off aggressive, it's not cute, it's not feisty, it's not funny. It tends to elevate. Okay. My mirror person was very aggressive. And I want you guys to look out for a lot of things. Men get abused too. If you see a woman who has a very terrible relationship with her father and her brothers, that is the reddest flag ever. And you want to watch how she speaks to them, what that dynamic is, okay? You want to watch that, and you do want to watch, if you do know any of her exes, what those scenarios were, okay? And I'm not saying people can not heal. Some people do come from a bad past and they can heal and get help and be better and be different, but it takes a lot of work, and you have to be dedicated to that. Like, I'm dedicated to my breakdown and rebuild. Like, I refuse to be a victim. I refuse to not have complete control over my actions and what I do. And I refuse to be one of those people who don't take accountability. Like, I'm never going to sit and complain that someone did something to me, because I invited them in. And you have invited these people in too. You've invited them into your life. You've invited them into your apartments. You've invited them into your beds. You've accepted their seed to have their children. Like, it just goes on and on and on. You just see the elevation of, like, okay, disrespectful conversation. Oh, and now we're dating. And now I'm letting them kiss me. And now I'm letting them touch me. And now they're at my apartment. Like, this is allowing that's going on. This is an allowing. Okay. Nobody just jumps into your life without your permission. And a lot of you guys are blinded to this. You're desensitized to it because this is something, like I said, that's been repeated your whole life. So it's normal. Like, it's normal for me to hear a lot of noise. I live in New York City. If I go to a quiet place internally, I'm a freak out because I am not used to that. It's not normal for me. So when I met my mirror person, he was very aggressive. There was a scenario where he invited me. There was like a street fair going on, and I met him at the street fair. And I remember us walking around and just looking at, all of the vendors that were out. And something interesting happened. I just walked away. I just kept walking and looking at other vendors. When I tell you, this is not in my book, so this is a bonus for you guys. This is not my book, Dating Scorpio. He flipped out. He flipped out that I was so independent that I could just walk away, walk down the street, and do what the hell I want to do as an adult. And when he caught up to me, he was like, I ain't that fucking dude. I ain't that dude. But like, he was going off in the middle of the street, and there were people looking. And the same, and this is interesting, and I'm just figuring this out about myself as I'm talking to you. Um, I didn't even react, honey. I did the same thing I did with the Pisces. I started laughing like, fuck out of here. I can do whatever I want to do. And I didn't say anything to him. I just started laughing, and I kept walking down the street. Because what I did know was that I'm not fighting no grown man. I'm not even going to argue with a grown man. And number three, I'm gonna keep doing what makes you feel uncomfortable. Like, I'm going to keep walking down the street. And that's when I knew that one of his biggest insecurities was being left or being dismissed. One of his biggest insecurities ever. Somebody significant left him in his life. So just me walking away was so triggering. But that in itself, and this happened in the beginning, and I still talked to him that night. You see how I still stayed in the mix. I was still engaged in the relationship after he got aggressive. This is what I'm saying to a lot of you guys. Okay. That is considered aggressive. Now, a lot of you may have had a conversation and be like, oh, what are you talking about? But like, I didn't do none of that. I'm not having a conversation with you. I'm not talking. I'm not responding. I'm still walking down the street. I'm still doing what makes you upset. Okay. Now, he never put his hands on me, but I think he felt like I wasn't the one he could do that with. Do I feel like he's put his hands on women? Absolutely. Are you kidding me? Absolutely. In fact, I think he's put his hands on his mother. Him and his mother had the most volatile relationship I've ever seen. And that told a whole entire story of how he deals with women. I just wanted to give this to you guys tonight. And I implore you to go watch this film. I thought it was really important that young adults were in there. The people who were next to me couldn't have been no more than 22 years old. And I was like, wow. And people were crying, like it was very emotional. There were people crying next to me and behind me, in front of me. And it did hit a nerve. It was done very, very well. It's not a mommy dearest type of movie, but a lot of people saw themselves in these characters. And for you guys, I know it's really challenging to see yourself outside of maybe victimhood, like, oh my gosh, he did this to me. And you want to create the story, and maybe you want to tell people, maybe you don't, but you don't see yourself as somebody who is traumatized and hurt, and you need help so that you can stop attracting these individuals. I was really proud of how the film was executed, how this girl figured it out. She was like, "No, what the fuck is going? I'm not going to be my mother. Like, I see this happening right now. I see it happening, and this is not. I'm not going to be one of those people." And she did put an end to it. But this is just one story out of millions where women are not putting an end to this, or men are not putting it into their relationships. They're sitting in those relationships. They're having people's babies. They're having whole babies with somebody who's been talking down to them for years, putting hands on them for years. And it's like, how's having a baby going to solve this? Now it's even worse. Now it's even worse. Where are you going to go with a whole baby? You know? Um, and so yeah, I just wanted to give that to you guys. You can re-listen to this. And what I don't want you to do is go right into the blame game. This happens more than not on my channel, and it makes me want to turn off the comments, to be honest. I want people to have a voice and I want them to respond, but it makes me want to turn off the comments a lot of the times to individuals who just cannot see themselves, and they want to make excuses, and they don't want to get in the mirror, and they don't want to say, you know what, I have a problem. I have a problem because I am inviting in unhealthy individuals who want to harm me. And that is huge. And I had to look at myself in that way. Like, wait, somebody wants to harm me. Like, what the fuck is going on? You know what I'm saying? Even when in dating Scorpio, Scorpio number, was it Scorpio number 2? The one who told me he wanted to put a bag over my head so nobody looks at me. Like, that's even just saying that is abusive. It's abusive. What are you talking about? You know what I'm saying? And so I just wanted to give that to you guys. Um, and we're going to continue to talk about this. This is vital. We're going to continue to talk about violence We're going to continue to talk about trauma, walking around with trauma, choosing relationships through your trauma, tolerating trauma, feeling like you're unworthy to have healthy relationships, even with yourself, and the blame game. I'm going to continue with that because that's the hardest for a lot of you to deal with. Pointing the finger seems to be the easiest way out. Somebody did this to me, but nobody's talking about how you allowed somebody to do it to you. We had this conversation with Cassie and Diddy. We're going to continue to have this conversation. All right, guys, I am going to turn in now. So I'll see you in my next podcast video.